In Lesson 4.5, Solving Proportions, you will be using proportions to solve problems. A proportion is an equation stating that two ratios or rates are equivalent. For example, 6/8 is equal to 3/4. One thing that is always true about a proportion is that the cross products are equal. For example, if you were to look at this one right up here, 6 times 4 is 24, and 8 times 3 is also 24. Anytime you multiply diagonally in a proportion, you're going to end up with two things that are equal. This fact will help you to solve for a missing number in a proportion. For example, after 2 hours, the air temperature had risen 7 degrees. Write and solve a proportion to find the amount of time it will take at this rate for the temperature to rise an additional 13 degrees. What you're going to do is you're going to take this information right here. 2 hours, the air temperature had risen 7 degrees. So it was 7 degrees Fahrenheit in 2 hours. Now you don't have to write the labels down, but I write the labels down so I can help keep myself organized. Since I put the 7 degrees on the top and the 2 hours on the bottom, I'm going to, on the other side, also put the degrees Fahrenheit on the top and the hours on the bottom. So it says, write and solve a proportion to find the amount of time it will take at this rate for the temperature to rise an additional 13 degrees Fahrenheit. So that 13 is going to go right there. And we don't know how long it's going to be, so we're going to call that x. Now, since these are two equivalent ratios, their cross products are going to be equal. I always start with the cross product that has the variable. So I'm going to go like this. 7 times x is 7x. And that's going to equal 2 times 13. 2 times 13 is 26. So 7 times x is 7x, and 2 times 13 is 26. That gives us this equation of 7x equals 26. And then you're going to go ahead and divide both sides by 7. When you do that, you end up with x equaling about 3.7 hours. Couple things I want to point out here. First of all, some of you may have had some experience with proportions before, and you have maybe been told that you multiply these two numbers and divide by this one over here. And that actually is true. If you look at our problem, we multiplied 2 times 13 to get 26, and then we took that answer and divided it by 7 to get about 3.7. But I do want you to write the equation like this using the two cross products being equal, because eventually in algebra you're going to get to proportions that aren't quite as nice and simple as this, and you need to have this understanding of the reason why we multiply and then divide is because these two cross products are equal. The other thing I wanted to point out is if you would have chosen to write this the other way, if you would have done 2 hours 7 degrees equals x hours for another 13 degrees, you would have ended up with the same problem. You would have 7 times x, which is 7x, and 2 times 13, which is 26. You would have 7x equals 26. You may want to pause the video and try the next two on your own. All right, let's go ahead and start with our variable and do the cross product. X times 10 is 10x. And that's going to equal 4 times 9. 4 times 9 is 36. Now to solve this equation, instead of multiplying by 10, we divide by 10. And I don't even need to reach for a calculator for this because when you divide by 10, you just move the decimal point one place to the left. So x is going to equal 3.6, 3 and 6/10. All right, our next example, again, I'll start with the cross product that has the variable. 2 times y is 2y equals 34 times 5. 34 times 5, that's going to be 170. And then divide both sides by 2. Y is going to equal 85. All right, in the next example, we're going to use a proportion to make a prediction. So during a blood drive, the ratio of type O donors to non-type O donors was 37 to 43. I'm going to go ahead and write that like this, 37 over 43. And 37 would be the ones that are the type O donors. So I'm going to label it to keep myself organized. And then the 43 would be the non-type O. I'm just going to write non to save a little time. Now it says about how many type O donors would you expect in a group of 300 donors? All right, this one actually is a little bit tricky now that I look at this. We want to know how many we would expect out of 300 total. So we don't really want to write our ratio like this. We want to write it as 37 type O out of how many total donors? Well, if there were 37 type O and 43 that were not, that's a total of 80 donors. Now I can predict how many I would expect in a group of 300 donors. I'd put the 300 donors on the bottom because it needs to be right across from the 80 donors that we had in our total before. And we don't know how many would be type O, so that's going to be our variable. Now the equation is going to be 80 times x, which is 80x, equals 37 times 300. 37 times 300 is 11,100. Now to go ahead and solve this, you would divide both sides by 80. And you would get x equals 138.75. Now, since we are talking about people, I probably wouldn't leave my answer as 138.75 people. I would round that to 139 people. So about 139 people. All right, you can pause the video and try the next one on your own if you would like. Recycling 2,000 pounds of paper saves about 17 trees. Write and solve a proportion to determine how many trees you'd expect to save by recycling 5,000 pounds of paper. Well, 2,000 pounds of paper, 2,000 pounds of paper saves 17 trees. Now we want to know how many trees. So we don't know the trees, so I'm going to put an X in the bottom. for 5,000 pounds of paper. So I'm going to put 5,000 on the top across from the 2,000 pounds. Now to solve it, we use cross products. 2,000 times x is 2,000x. And that's going to equal 17 times 5,000. Let's see what 17 times 5,000 is. That's going to be 85,000. Now you would go and divide both sides by 2,000. And that is 42.5. So x equals 42.5 trees. The last example just shows a different way to solve these types of proportional relationships. It says to use an equation. JC bought 8 gallons of gasoline for $22.32. Write an equation relating the cost to the number of gallons of gasoline. How much would JC pay for 11 gallons at this same rate? Well, we first would need to figure out how much he is paying per gallon. So we're going to take $22.32. $22.32 divided by 8. $22.32 divided by 8. That's $2.79 per gallon. That $2.79 is also called the constant of proportionality. It's $2.79 per gallon. So the cost is going to equal $2.79 times the number of gallons. So that's the equation we could use to figure out the price for any number of gallons. We want to know how much JC would pay for 11 gallons at the same rate. So the cost would be $2.79 times 11, since he bought 11 gallons. 279 times 11 is a cost of $30.69. Now that's by writing an equation. You could have also just written a proportion. You could have said 8 gallons, $22.32 is equal to 11 gallons over X, because we don't know the cost. And then you would go through and solve it, and you would end up with the same answer. It's just another way to solve the same problem.